So we're going to look at the article for week 3. We're going to discuss its meaning and then how it applies to your essay. Then the second thing that we're going to look at is related to your work for last week. So last week you were looking at how to analyze a piece of music. And I'm going to take you through some of those steps in relation to your textbook and then see how you can work with that with the piece Et Intera Pax. So we'll take a look at those few things. All right, so to start with, I am going to share with you the article that you were reading. I've just got to find it, sorry. I had it open just now. Ah, there we go. Okay. Let's see. Okay. All right, will you just tell me when you can see the article?
I can see.
Good. All right, so this article is about Vivaldi and the Ospedali of Venice. You can tell me what an ospedali is.
I think it's a place where Vivaldi worked.
Okay. Yes, it was the place where Vivaldi worked, and he spent a lot of his career in the ospedali. And what function does an ospedali have?
Functions.
What does it do to the community? What service does it provide to the community?
Charity works.
Yes, charity works. Okay. Now, the important thing here is that the Ospedali of Venice and the one that Vivaldi worked for was specifically for girls. And they were called foundling girls. And the word foundling means a child that has been abandoned. Okay, so think of children that have been abandoned by their parents for whatever the reason may be, or orphaned, so their parents have died. So it's like an orphanage. Okay, so the one in particular that Vivaldi was working for catered to girl children who had been abandoned by their families for whatever reason, or whose parents had died. Okay. So we're looking only at girls, and they are school-going age, so from babies all the way through to about 18, 20, somewhere around there, a little bit older perhaps, depending on their condition. Okay, so these are younger women, or girls, little girls, all together in an institution which looks after them, provides for their material needs like clothing, their food, their education. Now, let's consider this for a little while. This was in the 18th century, so the 1700s. Do you know at that point, in Europe at least, what the position of girls and women was? What kind of role did they play in society at the time? Were they important? Did they have important civic roles? Were they involved in government? Were they involved in teaching and education? Or was it slightly different to that?
I think it's safe to say that it was slightly different. Their roles were at home. They had to take care of the children and cook, clean, and all of that.
Right. So there were actually two primary roles for women at the time. And I mean, this isn't the only roles that they had, but these were the dominant ones. The first one was, as you've said, to be the mother of children, to be the wife of a husband, and to keep the household. Okay, so that's the first role of women that is very strong at the time. The second role of women was to be a nun or somebody who worked in the religious world, okay? And they were not ordained priests or ministers. They were people who went into a monastery. So they lived together in community, all single, and they were in community. They lived together and they supported each other. They didn't get married. They didn't have children. And they saw their life as primarily related to prayer and often to things like working in healthcare institutions. But healthcare was not something like we think of now. Okay, the hospitals were not around for the general public and that kind of thing. That's fairly a recent development in the Western world, at least. So mostly they were trying to give the medical care that they could to people that were able to receive it. So women had a much more specific role in the community, and they were not what we would say powerful in any sense of the word. So they didn't have positions in government. They didn't have positions in the church generally. So they weren't the people who were running a church, or they weren't the people who were leading worship in the church. They were not involved in the economy so much. Some women were, but not many. So they didn't own big businesses and things like that. They tended to be on a much smaller scale if they had a business at all. So they're a very different role for women. Okay, and so it was more desirable for most people to have boy children. A boy child had much more of a chance of success and of creating wealth and so on. So it seems that some families at least got rid of their girl children. If they had a girl child, they abandoned that child. And so there were a lot of female orphans. So these orphans came into these ospedali and were cared for by the church and by the local government. So this is not just a charity governed by the church, but also provided for in large part by the local government of Venice. Okay, so just like the city of Durban may provide funding for orphanages or for institutions which help people who are homeless or whatever have you. It's the same sort of principle there. Okay, so the important thing to note is that we're working with children, or Vivaldi is working with children who haven't got families. Some of these children, and also to note that these children were not going to necessarily be adopted, but that sometimes they would be offered a chance to get married to somebody in the community. Okay. Now, one of the ways that they, in these particular areas, managed to keep people or the women busy was to get them highly involved in music. And the ospedali where Vivaldi worked was well known for the music making. They had an orchestra, they had a choir, they had teachers who taught vocal lessons and choral lessons and instrumental lessons. And Vivaldi was the head of the choir, or directed the choir, and was also an instrumental teacher. And he wrote a lot of his music for these girls. Okay, and we get an indication of the kind of level that these girls were at by the kind of music that he wrote. So about 2 weeks ago, I was speaking to Nkosi about one of the other articles that we had read together. And we were talking about the word virtuoso. A virtuoso is somebody who's exceptionally talented on performing or singing. And they can do just about anything that is difficult. And we know from the kind of music that Vivaldi wrote for these girls that a number of them must have been exceptionally good. And in this article, we get a glimpse of that, because some of the people who wrote about the Ospedali speak about the excellence of the playing of some of the instrumentalists, and also of the singing of some of the soloists. Now, that would have been very, very unusual for the time, because women, while they could be opera singers, were very seldom instrumentalists in orchestras or professional orchestras. They were entirely dominated by men. So if you went to an opera performance, for example, while there might be some opera singers who were female, all of the performers of the violins, the cellos, all of those, the strings, the woodwinds and what have you, would have been men. So to have an orchestra entirely made up of women, and young women at that, was quite unusual. And so that drew a lot of people to come and hear the performances that they gave. So what would generally happen, for example, is that the women would perform once a week to an audience, and that audience would come to the Ospedali for a concert, and they would be entertained by the music of these girls and young women. What we do find is, in some of the things, if you've read through the article, and I hope you have, you'll see that the people who come to see the music often talk about the orchestra and the singers being hidden behind a kind of a grill, so that you could hear the music, but you couldn't see the women behind there. And that was for a specific reason. It was trying to stop men from coming simply to look at the women from a sexual perspective, but to come to enjoy the music. And also because this was a religious gathering, that to be looking at women just because of what they looked like would have been inappropriate, or at least that's what they thought at the time. Okay, so there are very interesting attributes of this particular place. The Ospedali was for women, and that it trained women very highly in musical abilities. And so they were being trained in the same way as men would have been trained, if not better sometimes than men in music in particular. Okay, so Vivaldi was writing for this particular context. One of the things that I want to bring out for you is, if we look when this article was written, it was written in 1938, which is 80 years ago. So that's a very long time ago, okay, more than 80 years ago. And so this is a very dated article, and you can see that by the way that it's written. The other thing which is important, if you go to the end of the article, you'll see that this was written in another language first. It was written in French first, and then translated into English by somebody called Manton Munro Marble over here, okay? He translated it into English. And the translation is very pompous in a way. It's a very pompous style that takes for granted all sorts of things, but also speaks in a kind of patronizing way of certain parts of society. Anyway, keep that in mind, because when you are writing or taking or using a source, one often has to ask questions of that source. Firstly, we know that this is an old source. So it's well over 80 years old. And so some of the information that it contains is dated, but is still interesting none the same. Okay. The other thing is that it's written by somebody who is not writing in English. And so it's been translated. And you'll know more than anybody else, because you're not English first language speakers, that when you translate something from Zulu into English, you can't always get the exact meaning across. The same would have been true in this circumstance. All right. Now, from the article, we learn that there were 4 Ospedali in Venice at the time of Vivaldi. And they were called the Ospedali I Mendicanti, La Pieta, La Incurabili, and the Ospedalato. It's fine if you just remember there was the Beggars Hospital, the Mercy Hospital, the Incurables Hospital, and the Little Hospital. And here's another interesting thing. You may have heard that if you go and study music in certain places, the place that you go and study music is called a conservatory. So the Conservatory of Music. So for example, if you went to Stellenbosch, the Department of Music is called the Conservatory of Music. Okay. And this man tells us that the conservatory was actually a place of refuge, firstly. And it must have taken on the musical idea of making music in a conservatory, because many of these places of refuge used music as a means of empowering those who came in to those institutions, to give them some kind of hope for the future, or to give them something beautiful to do. Okay. All right. I've already spoken to you about that they were charitable places, that they were intended for the sick or for abandoned children. They also were, and when you think of the word hospital, it's important not to think of our modern word hospital, because when you go to a hospital now, it's all about medical care. But the hospitals of Venice at this time are not so much places of medicine and of healing, but of care. So people who are down and out in society, that's where they would have been cared for. Not necessarily from a medical perspective, but just from a daily living perspective. Okay. So let's see, and often they included a school as well, so people were educated at these places. So here is a little story that comes out of one of the people who visited the Ospedali, where Vivaldi worked. So I'm going to read it for you, and this will give you some idea, at least, of what went on there. There are in Venice 4 of these female hospitals. This of the Incurabili, the Pieta, the Ospitaletto, and the Mendicanti. Infants are received into these hospitals, into the Incurabili, originally destined for another use, not without a sum given to them, into the Pieta and the other 2, as I take it, without any. So what he's saying is that if you want to get into the Incurabili hospital, you have to have some kind of money to pay for that. But if you go into the Pieta or the other 2 hospitals, that you don't need to provide any money or means for a child. Those who would choose for a wife one that has not been acquainted with the world go to these places to look for them, and they generally take all the care they can. They shall be as little acquainted with the world afterwards. What he means here is that the girls that are in these hospitals are not, they don't live outside of the hospital, they stay there, and they're not used to life outside in the normal world. So they are, in a sense, protected from the normal life going on outside. For some men, this would have been attractive. Those put into the Pieta are generally bastards. Now, today we use that word as a derogatory word, as a swear word almost. But at the time, and actually the original meaning of bastard is somebody who is born outside of marriage. Okay. There are a prodigious number of children taken care of in this hospital. They say they amount sometimes to at least 6,000. So we're not talking small numbers, huge numbers. And that before the erection of this charity, multitudes used to be found, which had been thrown into the canals of the city. So you'll remember we looked at pictures of Venice, and that instead of streets and that kind of thing, it has canals, waterways, okay, because it is a set of islands. So babies could be just thrown into the water. Every Sunday and holiday, there is a performance of music in the chapels of these hospitals, vocal and instrumental, performed by the young women of the place, who are set in a gallery above. And though not professed, what he means when he says professed, they are not nuns, are hidden from any distinct view of those below by a lattice of ironwork. The organ parts, as well as those of the other instruments, are all performed by the young woman. Now, he writes this because it's interesting at the time. They wouldn't have expected, anybody reading this would not have expected women to be playing instrumental parts. They have a eunuch for their master, and he composes their music. Do any of you know what a eunuch is?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right. So then you'll be a little bit shocked about what it is. Okay, now for many, many hundreds of years, when a boy had a very good voice, what they tended to do was to castrate him before his voice broke, so that his voice would never break and he could always sing high. So you get vocal parts in lots of older music called castrati, which are meant for men to sing, but are very high parts. Okay, so they were sung by men who'd had their testicles removed. So they could never progress into adulthood, really, as it were, or they never got the adult attributes of facial hair or that kind of thing. But also in the Arabic world, eunuchs were used for the same thing happened to them. They were used to protect women. You'll know in the Arabic world, women are almost always put aside, or not put aside, or kept aside in a special place in the house, and that no other men are allowed to see them. So obviously, if a man has had his testicles removed, he can't impregnate a woman and probably isn't interested so much in sex. So they used eunuchs to ensure the safety of the women. And this man, when he went to go and watch the music, thought that Vivaldi was a eunuch, and Vivaldi wasn't a eunuch. He was a priest, and he's the one who composes their music. Now, their performance is surprisingly good, and many excellent voices are among them. And there is somewhat still more amusing in their persons are because they are concealed. They are you can't see them. So people, he says, are going to hear the music because it is very good, but also because there's an element of mystery in it. They're not sure who is performing it, what do they look like, and how do they do this? Okay, and there's another one over there. So it's worthwhile to read through those three little extracts, which give you an idea of what it would have been like to listen to these girls performing. Now, there's a picture of Vivaldi. And also of this picture over here is of the performance and the people listening. Now, just before this in the article, the author speaks about why would it be that there could be as many as 6,000 orphans in a place like Venice. Now, Venice is a fairly large city, but it's not huge. It's probably this a bit smaller than Petermaritzburg. So how is it that there can be so many orphans? And he gives a number of reasons. Among them, that there were monasteries, lots of monasteries in Venice at the time. Monasteries are places where monks live. And a monk is like a nun, but a male version of a nun, somebody who takes vows of chastity and poverty and obedience. So that's somebody who dedicates their life to God, and as a result, they give up having sex. They put themselves under the authority of an abbot, and they give away everything that they have. So they don't have any material goods. Well, that's the ideal anyway. But what he's saying is that many of these men were having liaisons with women, and those women would then have a child. And because there was such shame involved in having a child outside of marriage, they would simply dispose of the child into the canals. So that's just one of the reasons that he gives. But I'm sure there will be another. Okay. The other thing which is let's just go to one of the other places that I wanted to speak about. So this article talks about the kind of work that Vivaldi would have been done and how what he did and what kind of money he would have earned for doing that, and when he worked at these places. So you can take a look at that. That's not particularly important for us to look at. What we do find is that these ospedali, by the time that he was becoming famous as an opera composer, were quite keen for him to be the composer in residence, if that's what you could call it. And they were willing to pay him more to stay there than rather to become a freelancer, as it were. You know what freelancing is? Freelancing is when you don't have a full-time job, so your money isn't coming, or your monthly salary isn't coming from a school or from the government, something like that. It means that you're working for yourself, that you're self-employed. What he speaks about in this part of the article is that there were different categories of singers and players at the ospedali, and they were like a hierarchy of those who were the elite down to those who were the beginners. And he says that those who were the very elite singers were the ones who got the most opportunities to meet with those who were interested in getting married or who were interested in funding the music programs. So they were the ones who tended to be the famous ones, if you can put it that way. He also speaks about how the ospedali was particularly famous while Vivaldi was there. And he says that he thinks it's because Vivaldi was the teacher and composer there. And we're not sure if that's really the case, but he says that after Vivaldi left and once he died, that the music program at the ospedali began to decline. So it does seem that it's possible that it was Vivaldi's influence that made the ospedali so famous. All right, now I highlighted this part because it's interesting to see what kind of influences come through in Vivaldi's music from working with these women. So it says here, with his orchestra and his choristers at La Pieta, Vivaldi had at his disposal a musical laboratory of unlimited resources. What was more characteristic of his pupils than their talents was the almost insatiable appetite for music. So what he's saying here is that because Vivaldi had the opportunity to work with good musicians on a regular basis, and because they were performing every week for the public, he had a number of opportunities to write music and hear what it sounded like, see if it worked, and then if it didn't work, he could refine it. If it did work, he could use it again. So he was using his compositions as experiments. And because he had to write music on such a regular basis, he could try things if they were good or bad. If they were good, he could use similar things in new music. If they didn't work, he could refine them and get them better. And because he was working with such good musicians and people who really wanted to play music, because this was one of the outlets of their creativity, meant that there was a willing group of people to play. So that was helpful for him and helped to get his style better and better. So the same is true of a composer called Haydn. I don't know if you've ever heard of Haydn or if you've ever sung some of Haydn's music. But Haydn wrote music for one person for most of his life. And he had to create music every week for live concerts. And because he had to create so much music, he could also experiment with the orchestra and orchestral sounds and see which things worked and which things didn't. And thus he became very, very important in classical music. So I've just highlighted here, these are the kind of things I've just been talking about. He could multiply his experiments, repeat them at leisure, study this or that problem of ensemble or detail without finding himself at the mercy of a clock or of a surly subordinate. So sometimes in professional orchestras, people get tired of having to play on a regular basis and they just couldn't be bothered. So that's what he's pointing out to. Says finally, he had to adapt himself to performers whose abilities were of unequal degree, from those who had only just been admitted to the orchestra to the maestro who came from afar to hear. So think about this. If you were a music teacher of people who were very brilliant players, but at the same time beginners. So, you know, if you have a choir, for example, that has some very experienced singers, but also lots of beginners. It's quite difficult to make them both happy, to stretch those who are the top singers and to develop the skills of those who are still new to singing. And that's what he had to do. They are suggesting here that it was because of that he became better and better, because he had to juggle these two abilities, those who were still developing and those who were very good, and create music that would work for both types of musician. Okay, so I've spoken about all of those things here. I've just highlighted this here. So while he was writing for all musicians of all different types of ability, he was writing for particular soloists, for flute and bassoon and for violin and mandolin at a particular occasion, because he knew that those particular players were really outstanding and could do very well. Okay, I think that's everything that I wanted to look at with this article. Is there anything that you want to ask about before I continue as to how this relates to your work?
Yes, sir. I don't think it's a question quite related to the article as much, but I just wanted to ask that what did they do with the women when they became older in the hospital?
I mean, when did they leave?
When they became older, what did they do with them? Because it seems like the article is talking about when they are young.
It's a very good. I'm not actually sure. I'd have to find out. I suspect that they got to their mid-20s or so. If they hadn't got married, that they were now sufficiently trained and educated to be able to look after themselves. So I think that's probably what it was, but I'll have to find out for you to say for sure. It's a good question. Any other questions?
Those who had to marry, was it their will to get married or they were just given away?
That's also a good question. Marriage ceremonies in the Western world almost always have some kind of consent. But I suspect that many women were pressured into getting married, or many women went into marriage because they felt that it was a better life for them and a way of integrating back into society. So I doubt very much whether many of the marriages were love marriages so much as convenience and arranged marriages. But we'd need to look for specific evidence for to see what those women actually, what happened to them and what kind of marriages they had.
Okay.
That's a good question. if you think of other questions while I'm looking at the next little piece of information, then just tell me, okay? Right, now I'm going to share the screen again, and this time I'm going to look at the assessment task, the second one, the Vivaldi essay. For the moment, we're ignoring the due date, which is long past, and I'm going to extend that indefinitely for the moment until we've gone through all of these articles. So next week will be our last article. So this essay is only 3 pages long that you're going to write. And it's about Vivaldi's Gloria, but it's also about the context in which Vivaldi wrote the Gloria. So part of that context is working out the, Vivaldi's genre of church music. And that's the article that we looked at last week. So the voice notes that I sent to you are about that article. That was week 1's article. Okay. Then we look at the role of the Gloria in the revival of Vivaldi's music. And that's what we looked at the first time that I got together with you. That's the article for week 2. Okay. And then this is the article for week 3, the context for which the Gloria was written. So the Gloria was written for these girls at the Ospedali. So you will have seen that on the Moodle page, I put up a recording, a YouTube recording of the Vivaldi Gloria being performed only by women. Okay, so because I wanted to give you a feel of what it would sound like and what it would look like. So I encourage you to look at that video if you haven't watched it already. And then our article for next week is about tenors and basses, because if you've only got women, who's going to sing the tenors and basses? So read that article for next week, okay? So in your essay, you have to look at 4 things in the essay. 1, 2, 3, 4. And you are going to only use those 4 articles that we've read, okay?
Yes.
Yes. So under each, so this, like, for example, you'll have an introduction, you'll write the little introduction. Your first section of the essay will be about the Gloria as part of the genre of church music in Vivaldi's composition. So then you can speak about what other types of church music Vivaldi wrote. Did he write masses? Did he write oratorios? Did he write cantatas? And what kind of other music did he write for the church? Okay. And was the Gloria a kind of a typical church composition, or wasn't it? Okay. And what other types of music influenced the church music? So last week when we were looking at that article, we discovered that a lot of the operatic music and the instrumental music which Vivaldi was involved in was absorbed into the style of the Gloria. Okay, so that's the kind of thing you would look at under number 1. Under number 2, you would need to read that article, if you haven't read it already, about how Vivaldi's music was rediscovered. Remember, after his death, it kind of lost its popularity and people forgot about it. And in the early 20th century, a whole lot of Vivaldi's music was discovered in a monastery library. And when it was rediscovered, it was republished and people got excited about it. Among those things was the Vivaldi Gloria. Okay, so go and have a look at that article to talk about how the Gloria was part of that process of uncovering Vivaldi's music in the 20th century. Then the context, and that's what we've spoken about today. The Ospedali, there were 4 of them, of which Vivaldi was the one of the musicians at the Pieta, the Ospedali di Pieta. And at that hospital or that institution, it looked after girls who had been abandoned. It gave them an education. In particular, it focused on their musical abilities, and Vivaldi helped to teach them musical instruments along with other teachers, and they performed once a week for those who wanted to come and hear, and the performances were therefore generating income and so on. Okay, so look at all of those things and review those things which we've spoken about and talk about them here. And then next week we'll look at about the tenors and basses. So when this article is, or this essay is not only about the Gloria, it's about the context in which the Gloria emerged, okay? Because music doesn't just come out of nowhere. The people who write the music are influenced by all sorts of things that happen around them. And for Vivaldi, one of the primary influences was those girls who he wrote for. He was writing for good musicians who were performing on a regular basis, who were good instrumentalists, who were good singers, and who could pull off these works, okay? But he was also influenced by other things like the operas that he was writing and the vocal styles that he was experimenting with. And he was also able at this place to experiment with different ways of putting instruments together, using the voices and so on. Okay, so this essay is about the context of the Gloria, not so much the Gloria itself. You're not going to give me a history of the Gloria, and you're not going to tell me it's got 5 movements, it's whatever. I'm not interested in that. I know that already. What I want to find out is, do you know in how this work came to be? What was around Vivaldi in Venice? What kind of people was he writing for? Under what conditions was he writing? Those are the things that I'm looking for. Does it make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yes, it does.
Good. Okay. Now, the important thing is this. You see that 10 marks out of your 50 is for the correct use of quotation marks and punctuation and correct spelling. So it's so important that when you've written your essay, that you check that you've used quotation marks when you've taken information directly from one of these articles, and that you've put a citation with it. Okay, you know how to do citations. We've gone through this kind of thing before. But if you're struggling with it, ask me, okay? Because this counts 10 marks. And your bibliography and citation is worth 20 marks. You see that the content is only worth 20 marks. These things over here, the quotation marks, punctuation, correct spelling, bibliography, and citation are worth 60% of your marks. Okay? So those mean that that means that this is important, very important. Okay? You with me?
Yes, sir.
My suggestion is that you write the essay, or start writing the essay already, okay? Because we've already gone through 3 of these things, okay? We've just got 1 more to do, and next week, once we've read this one together, then you will have a better idea of what that's about. Then you can start putting the essay together, and when you think you've got it basically correct, then ask somebody else to read through it to see if it makes sense. Then check, have I put all of the citations in? Have I referenced things correctly? It doesn't matter if every sentence is referenced. If you took the information for every sentence out of the articles, then just put it there. That's fine, I don't mind, okay? Don't try and pull off stuff as your own when it isn't. Just indicate where the stuff comes from every time, okay? Then the other important thing is, don't use any other sources, only those 4 that we have used for weeks 1 through to 4, okay? Nothing from the internet, nothing from Wikipedia, nothing else, only from these ones, okay?
Yes.
All right. Now, let's move on. I just want to go and get a tissue quickly, and then we're going to look at how to analyze some music, all right? Right, so one of the assessments that you're going to do is an analysis of a piece from Vivaldi's Gloria. So I want to show you 2 important things here to help you with that, okay? if you go onto Moodle, you will find the piece of music that you need to analyze. It's called Et Intera Pax. Okay, so if you go on to week 7, I think it is. I'll check for you just now. Week 7. I think it's you just click on the link and it will give you the score that you have to look at, and it looks like this. Where is it? Struggling to find it on my share screen thing. Here. It looks like this. Okay, here's the 18 terapax. So it's got an introduction by the orchestra, and then you see the voices come in here. And if you just scroll down, you'll get all of the pages. Okay. So the first thing to do is to go and listen to this piece of music while you are reading the score at the same time, so that you can see what the music is doing and you can hear it at the same time. So first go and listen to the piece of music with the score that you download from Moodle. Okay, that's the first thing to do. Then I want you to go to the textbook. I'll show you where the textbook is on Moodle. Let me just share that with you. Right, so if we go onto the Moodle site, sorry, let me just, this is Moodle, but it's, you won't see it yet. Sorry, it's on week 6. Okay. You'll see there's the Et Intera Pax. Okay. If you go to the top of the page, or near the top, there's the top module aims. And if you come right down just after the aims, you'll see Choral Studies textbook. Okay. If you click on that, you'll get the textbook, and you'll find that on page, let me just show you the page now. Chapter 3 is about analyzing music for rehearsal. Now, you've probably read this before because we did it last semester as well, but I'm trying to reinforce what we did last semester again. You need to ask these questions that you see down here for each, for this piece that you're looking at. So the text, is there anything unique or unusual about the text of the piece? If the text of the piece is not in a language you know, how will you teach it? What does the text mean? Will the meaning need to be explained by the choir? Okay, so I'm going to show you something that will help you with that. Okay, the voice ranges, you're going to look at each voice individually from the beginning to its end, and I'll show you how to do that now. You look through the vocal parts to find their highest and their lowest notes. You say to yourself, is this normal for this voice? Or is it very high? Or is it very low? And you ask the rest of these questions as well. So you need to look at each part, the soprano part, the alto part, the tenor part, and the bass part individually to see if they go very high, if they go very low, if there are parts which are very difficult and which need particular attention. Then we need to look at the structure of the piece. How long is it? How many bars does it include? How many sections are there in this piece? Are all the sections the same length, or are they different? Are the sections the same, or are they different? If they're different, why are they different? Are all the sections in the same key? And if they aren't, how are you going to teach the choir to change the key? Are there some sections which are more difficult than others? Then what is the key of the piece, and does it change during the piece? If there are changes and it's unaccompanied, how will you get those changes to be accurate? In our case, it is an unaccompanied piece, which helps. Okay, a melody. What makes the melody unique? We'll take a look at that just now. How does the rhythm of the melody work? Is it difficult? And do the words fit well with the melody? How long are the phrases? Where will the choir breathe? How will you teach the melody? Are there parts of the piece where the melody is not in the soprano part? Harmony, we'll ask all of these questions. I'm not going to go through them each. What genre is this piece? Is it Baroque, classical, or romantic? What genre does it come from? Solos, are there any solos? And articulation. So there are all of these things that we need to ask ourselves. Now, if you want to find out how to do that in detail, you should read the chapter because the chapter shows you how. But first, let's just take a look at some of these things step by step. So here's the 18 Terapax. And what we notice is that here's the soprano part, here's the alto part, the tenor part, and the bass part, all right? So it's the basses that start this particular piece, okay? And they have this very simple tune. Da, 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 da. So there's that tune. Da, 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 da. This little section here and there forms a kind of a phrase, okay? You'll see, look at the tenor part. It also has da, da, da. Also starts with da, da, da. And look at the alto, da, da, da. And the soprano, da, da, da. You see, they all start with that ba, ba, ba. One note going
Yes.
notes, and then it goes up a semitone. Okay, so that's an important little section there. It shows us that that is an important melody, that little da, da, da. And when you listen to the piece, you'll hear that. Okay. Then we have to look at some of the other things that are important in this melody. So you'll see this benevolun. This is, those are semitones going up. Do you see in the tenor part there? That comes over and over again as well. Here it is in the bass part. Da, 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 da. And you'll find it in other parts of the piece too, okay? So you need to look for little pieces of melodies that come over and over again, because those are the things that give the character to the melody, okay? If we look at the key signature has two sharps. If there are two sharps, what key could we be working with?
D major.
Yes, and what is the relative major of, the relative minor of D major?
It is B minor.
Yes, B minor. So this piece is actually in B minor. If you look here, you'll see that there are A sharps all over the place. A sharp is the seventh note of B minor, the raised seventh. So we're working in B minor, okay? So this is in a minor key, and if you listen to it, you'll actually hear that, all right? We also have to look at the words. Et intera pax hominibus bone voluntatis. And I want to show you a very helpful little resource for you. Let me just show you on this. If you go back onto Moodle and you go to week 6, you'll find here analysis and rehearsal consideration on Antonio Vivaldi's Gloria. If we click onto that, this is an analysis of every movement of Vivaldi's Gloria. You have to go all the way down to page 27, I think it is. Let's just check. No, that's too far. Sorry, page 11. Gloria. Here, it's on page 19. Then when you look at this, you'll see that it's quite helpful. It says et intera pax, oops, sorry. The et intera pax hominibus, the key is B minor time signature 3/4 andante, and the orchestra is violin 1 and 2, viola, cello, and bass with the organ. Okay, it's the second movement. The text, et intera pax hominimus bone voluntatis, the English, peace on earth to men of good will. So now you know what the English is, okay? Now, features. The role of each instrument is clearly divided. It tells you what's going on here, which is helpful, but it's from an instrumental perspective, okay? Then, do you see it talks about this here? Dee-da-da, dee-da-da. That little section of the 2 repeated notes and then going up a semitone, okay? It talks about that. So read through this and see what it says, because that will give you a little bit of an indication. It doesn't tell you everything that you need to know, but it does give you an outline. So that's on Moodle for you. But I want you to go in much more depth than what this particular resource does. Okay, so you're going to ask yourself all sorts of questions. Let's have a look at the score again. So, for example, let's take a look at the soprano part. The soprano part comes in at bar 14. Dee da dee da dee da. And it goes on to the next page. Da da da. Then there's a rest. Da 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 da. We need to look, if we look at the whole soprano part, which carries on over here, carries on over there. There's that rising semitone thing, by the way. See, it goes da 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 da. Okay. We look at these parts here. We ask ourselves, does this soprano part go very high? There's the soprano part again. There's the soprano part. The highest note that I've seen so far is an F sharp. Let's have a look. Let's keep on going down. There's some more of the soprano part. Some more of the soprano part. Some more. Here you can see some more of it here at 60. Some more of it. Some more. What we see is that the soprano part doesn't go very high. If you look at the whole thing, you'll see that the highest notes are F sharp and G. And the lowest notes are also around about there. So it's only within an octave. It goes a little bit more than an octave. It's not difficult in terms of range. And the same is true of the other parts. Their range is fairly limited, which means that it's not difficult to pitch. So you're not going to have difficulty with getting people into very high notes or very low notes. Okay. That's very helpful. So what I want you to do is to find what the highest note and the lowest note for each part is and write that down. That's what you're going to tell me. The highest note is this and the lowest note is that. Okay, for each part. Then you're going to tell me about the individual part. Is the soprano part very difficult? Sometimes you'll find that one part is much more difficult than the others. Then you talk about that. Okay. Then you look at the melodies. Are the melodies difficult to sing? Are there lots of jumps in the melodies? So if we just take a look at the beginning. Let's look at that soprano part again. This is where the soprano part comes in, okay? That whole first line, it's just stepwise movements going up and down by step. Here, it's all on the same note, okay? All on the same note. Here, it's just going up by step, okay? And here, it's going up by step. The only big jump here is an octave, okay? We look over here, not much jumping around. It's mostly stepwise movement, isn't it? Okay. And you'll find that throughout this piece. There's not a lot of jumping around. So you need to comment on that. The movement is mostly stepwise. There are some leaps, but there are not many leaps. But it's characterized by this interval of a semitone. Da, da, da. And then that da, 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 da. So the semitone forms a very important part of the melody. Okay. Does that make sense?
It does, it does.
Oh, yes, it does.
Then the form of the piece or the structure of the piece. So this piece is what is called a little bit like imitation or fugue. Okay, it's not a classical fugue, but it does have imitation. So one voice starts, then another voice comes in. Then another voice comes in and the other one is similar to it. They are imitating each other. So the idea here in this kind of thing is imitation. Just remember that word. The form is based on imitation. It's not like a sonata form. It's not like a binary form or a ternary form. It's all to do with the voices imitating each other. Okay. But what I do want you to do is to count out all of the bars and to find if there are sections where there is a cadence. Where does it come to a stop for a little bit? Okay. Or where does the music breathe? Look for all of the places where the music breathes and then find out how long each of those sections is, okay? And what the key is in each of those sections and put that into a table so that we can see here's section 1, it's in B minor. Here is section 2, it's in whatever. Here's section 3, it's in whatever. And here's section 4, it's also in B minor. So we can see B minor going to this, going to that, coming back to B minor. Make sense?
Yes, sir.
Then look at this. If you look at the accompaniment, do you see that the accompaniment is a lot of this quavers with semiquavers at the top here? They're all just doing chords, huh? Do you see that?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
On the top, the singers are just singing slow notes going on and on and on, okay? Do you see it's almost the same all the way through? Okay. So speak about the accompaniment, okay? But it's mostly chords, sometimes semiquavers with quaver bass. If you look over here, for example, you'll see that the whole bar is one harmony, B minor harmony, okay? This bar is another harmony, but it's the same harmony through the whole bar, okay? So the harmony is actually moving very slowly, okay? And you find that all the way through the piece. In fact, right from the beginning. Do you see there? That bar is all B minor. That's a B minor chord, a B minor chord, a B minor chord. They're just in different positions. Okay? Does it make sense? So speak
Yes.
of the harmony. It moves, the harmonic rhythm is one bar. It moves one bar at a time. Okay.
Yes.
So those are the kind of things that I want you to look for in your musical analysis. We'll look at this again next week as well, okay, once we've looked at the article. All right, so that's all that we're going to do for today. I think let's give you a whole week to read next week's article. So if we can we meet on Monday again next week at 2 p.m.?
Yes. No
Oh,
problem.
yes, sir.
Okay, I'll send out a link for our class over the weekend, okay?
Yes.
All right, and I'll post this video up on the website, on Moodle, so that you can watch it again if you need to.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, have a nice day and a good week.
Thank you. Are
Thank
you feeling
you.
better?
A little bit. I'm still not feeling too good, but I'm a bit better. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Are you feeling better now?
Yeah, a bit. I'm sleeping a lot. The medication is making me sleep a lot.
Yeah, that's good. Sleeping is the best way to get rid of it.
Thank you.
Okay. Have a good week, everybody.